so thank you very much for this invitation and for this great panel and very important topic. So I would just start, as you already presented everybody, I would just like to start with a first question that you kind of mentioned, which is how did all of the organization that you're part of are addressing and putting AI in the core of the development? Maybe Virginie, you can start.
Yeah, thank you, Stephanie. I'm glad to be here and to talk about such an interesting topic. As an independent person, I didn't really implement any AI technologies, but I have witnessed firsthand how the public sector is implementing it, and especially in the health sector, to try to gather as much data and information as possible to really analyze and follow the pandemic crisis, the COVID-19 crisis. And I would say what we have seen across the US and Europe is three major types of implementation. One is trying to map the crisis, and we had a great initiative between the public and private sector in the US, between the USA government and Deloitte, which is called Data USA, where you can really see on a daily basis the evolution of cases, the rate of mortality, and a great graphics enabling the health sector and all stakeholders within the civil society, but also citizens, to share the information and to act upon it. Another thing that has been very trendy within the government, and especially in the UK, is to try to use agent model modeling to enhance the preparedness and their reaction to the crisis. We had an initiative back in March 2020, which is still going on within the health sector in the UK, and they are really trying again to pattern the behaviors of citizens, to foresee in the long term what could be the evolution of the virus and what could be the evolution of the answer from the public sector. Then what I witnessed also is a way to develop hackathons and to try to map for specific public policies the impact of it. So that's how I have witnessed and I have assisted companies in implementing AI per se. And in France also we had an acceleration of the digitalization of the main administration.
All right, thank you. So Woto, would you like to give your feedback on that?
Sure. So maybe I'll start with Peter Drucker's quote, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." To me, the first task of putting AI at the core of organization really is to create a data-driven culture. And when everyone in the organization asks, what's the basis of your strategy? Do you have the data to support it? I think this is an indication of the presence of a data-driven culture. And that to me is a very important aspect to get right. There are other aspects when it comes to how to put AI at the core of the organization. At the strategy level, the AI strategy has to be business-driven. And so there has to be a process where we identify and prioritize high-value use cases. The second part is about the skills. An organization will also need to build up what I call translational skill, to be able to translate the business use cases into data that's required and the AI techniques to apply. From a structure standpoint, effective execution will need to be supported by what I term as OpsTech integration or OpsTech structure. So the ability to stand up a project team quickly is actually very important. The team members from the different disciplines, like from the business side, AI, ML engineers, the project managers, UI, UX expert has to come together. Very quickly. And from a system perspective, I think finally we have to have a robust IT infrastructure. And in our case, it is on-prem and a cloud hybrid. Thanks.
You are muted, Stephanie, I think.
Oh, sorry. So the question that arises regarding the pandemic is that we'd like to know whether or not this has accelerated the process of transformation and the also transformation in the mindset of people. So can you also give your comments on this, please? Virginie?
Yes. So certainly there was a transformation, and especially for the health sector, which now is considered the pilot sector, to see where and how we can implement on a bigger scale, I would say, the transformation towards AI outside the traditional sector, which were deep learning, robotics, and automatization. So certainly I would say an acceleration of the digitalization and the implementation of AI. If you really talk about transformation, I think you should make a distinction depending on the level of maturity of the company before the crisis. If the AI plan was strategically planned, was launched, as Moto was saying, a lot of factors, meaning the teams, the strategic partnership were in place. Yes, I think you can say that there was a real transformation that was pushed by the COVID-19. If you are looking at companies that are less mature, I would say that it's not a transformation, but an acceleration of projects that might have been pilots so far. Also, what I think we are seeing is that the transformation in the public sector, and sometimes it's a bit overrated and underrated and underlooked, has been going on for 10 years already, whether at national level, but also in international level, where the first issuance of innovation principle were back in 2009. So I think that's what also the COVID has demonstrated, that the transformation is here, it's happening, and in some sector it did accelerate the process.
Thank you. Sitowo?
I think COVID-19 pandemic has definitely demonstrated that we can move a lot faster than our business as usual pace. And during this pandemic, what we have done in Singapore is we have digitalized all aspects of the pandemic response, all the way from testing. How do we know who is supposed to go for testing? The testing result coming in, and then that triggered then a set of actions to be taken, whether it's contact tracing, who do we put on quarantine orders for the COVID positive patients, the case management, the end-to-end case management for them, including movement across different facilities, whether healthcare institution or isolation facility, up to the point of discharge. And beyond management of COVID, there's also a lot of digitalization in how we perform safe management for public venues and also for workplaces. And there's also looking at how then we can use that for people to be able to move in the community more safely in a form of movement control. So it's important for us to remember that actually we can move a lot faster than our business as usual pace. And it's important to be able to continue the momentum and lock in all the digital gains that we have had so far. And what we realize what's important really is that from it has to be, like I said previously, it has to be business led, and the integration between the ops and tech is very important. And before we actually digitalize a workflow, and the workflow obviously invariably, because of the large amount of data that we have captured, will have AI embedded. But what we need to do is to make sure that it works as a workflow first for the business. And we put together a joint team to look at the end-to-end user journey and finalize the workflow before we commence any design of the IT and the AI system to enable that. So that's the first thing. It has to be business driven. Second is also what we realize is that there's a lot of data being captured, and it's important for us to have what we call single source of truth. We speak a lot about the use of data, but very often we realize that the same data field can be found in many different source systems. How do we know which is a source of truth to use? And that's very important. And we have set up a COVID data office. It mirrors our peacetime government data architecture, where we have set aside or assigned a core data sets from different government agencies that we will need on a day-to-day basis. And this structure actually allows us to assign a single source of truth duties or obligations to the different government agencies holding on to the core data, so that we know where to source for clean and up-to-date data to support all the operations. And not to forget also, I think in spite of all the pace at which that we move in order to digitalize a lot of the work that we do, we are also cognizant that as we set up a lot of our infrastructure and put our data together, especially as we fuse different data sources, it becomes a prime target for hackers. And so we have also set up a joint command structure for cybersecurity to look at what are the different risks, not just cyber risk, data risk, but also the business risk that it introduces, and has it escalated to the relevant authority for acceptance of the risk, if it is acceptable. So this is, I think, these are the things that we are putting in place in order to be able to continue the momentum, so that we can actually continue to have the gains.
Nice. So a related question, do you think that people are ready for that? Because as it was going quite slowly, they were kind of following the movement. Now you are kind of pushing them towards the data-driven everyday life and collecting data and using data almost everywhere. For example, when you have a government that proposed to trace people all over the country to know whether or not they were in contact with COVID positive people and so on. So do you think, well, the global people, I would say Lambda person, would follow or kind of be resistant? What is your opinion? Who wants to start?
Yes, I would. I think certainly there is a two-speed pace for that. There are the people who are used to work in AI and data, which for them is just the natural following and the natural step. Especially if you are a researcher and now you are living in this creative bubble where everything is happening, the investment are massive, there is strategic plan at government level, international level, everywhere, even businesses. And there is a strong interaction between the different actors, as Sumodo was saying. If you are a citizen and you are also already engaged into it, I would say that for you, it's something that you foresaw. But if you don't have the literacy, it can be a bit scary. And so what we are seeing in France is, even though there are some applications that has been developed, some people are very resistant to the change. Some people are embracing it. And I think it also comes on how you do present both technologies. Are they always very needed? Because there is also this hit momentum around AI where everything needs to be data driven, which is, I'm not sure it's always the case. And you also have to be very, I would say, trying to teach and embrace the change by bringing people with you, by putting the safeguards there to be sure that the fundamental freedoms are respected, that the applications that are developed are needed, and there is a purpose. So it's always a system of checks and balances between the economic, security consideration, societal, and human rights, I would say, approach. And I think we need to be a bit more, to emphasize a bit more the education part of it. I don't think we do enough. The mainstream media are focusing much more on robotics. So for people, it's something that they know about. But when it comes with other forms of AI application, I'm not sure the average citizen, I would say, or the average beneficiary knows. And that's something I think should be of interest and should be implemented into the strategy of developing AI's application. And also, I think we should still question ourselves whether we need that much data. And is it necessary, or is there already some processes and some way to innovate just to enhance and improving what is already existing? So that's how I see things, Stephanie.
Thank you. For you, Situa?
Yes, I agree with Virginie. It takes a lot of education for people to understand. I think it's important to have that proper value proposition being made very clear to the citizens and to the people, so that the acceptance of the solutions or the digital solution is there. Because if it's not useful to people, nobody is going to use it. Right? You can't push a digital solution purely based on being altruistic. Right? I'm helping others. Right? There's a segment in the society that who want to do so, but not everybody is driven by that. And I think it's a bit of a what's in it for me that's important for us to be able to communicate to the population at large. So that's the education that Virginie was talking about, and I agree with her. The second part she also touched on very briefly is about data minimization. So the principle that we take is a data minimization approach where along with our concept of a minimum viable product in terms of digital solution, we also think about minimum viable data. What's the minimum viable data set that we need to collect in order to make this work? And we don't collect more than what is necessary. And not only that, we put forward a very, how should I say, a formal data retention policy so that people know that the data is being collected for what purpose, what is it used for, and how long will the data be kept, and beyond which the data will be purged, and they know that we are not keeping the data forever. I think that's very important to give assurance to the people and to have the acceptance. And last but not least is to accept and to articulate the possible risks that are involved, right? Whether it's cybersecurity and others. I think it's important for us to acknowledge that there's such a risk. It's not just about benefit. It's not just a bit of roses. There are risks that we need to mitigate and what we are doing to mitigate that risk. I think if you take into consideration these different aspects, the acceptance, hopefully, from the public will be higher. Thanks.
Thank you. So a more general question about the geopolitics of AI. What are the risks and opportunities for the public sector and international organization?
Yeah, thank you. That's a question I like, that I find very interesting. I would say from a geopolitics point of view, I would say that the COVID crisis has underlined the strategic positioning that was taken over the last 5 to 10 years by the main stakeholders. So you have basically the international organization, with the UN being much more the safeguard of human rights, and EU being much more industrial focused, with a very strong ethical benchmark, and then you have the states. And you can see that the Asian bloc and the United States bloc are ahead because they invested first, they develop, and the stage of development is much higher than in other countries. Behind there is the MENA zone, the Europe zone, and then you have the companies who are investing massively. I think 2 years ago, there was an increase by 120% of the investment in R&D. And you also have, and that's something that is a bit new from the COVID, you have a multiplication of civil society or small startups really focusing on hackathons and making their activities with the government needs and acting on a very short deadline within 2 months to develop projects and to gather a lot of people from the population to try to be as diverse. When it comes more specifically to risk and opportunities, I think we have seen the same thing. Risks are always the same. We didn't identify over the last 5 years new risk. So cyber attacks, as Moto was saying, is a big risk. To increase and to systematize the inequalities and the bias. Lack of access of a large population to both technology and therefore the risk to have them left behind, especially in continent like in Africa. Gender also discrimination because women are less represented because, for example, in Africa, they have less access to the internet. Technology that is a technology per se. As Moto was saying, we need to be sure that the technology is purpose-driven and that we know for the public actors why we are launching it. And we have this hit momentum again right now where technology and AI is a bit overrated, I would say, or there is an increase in the application. So we need also to be sure that we always question, do we need it? Why do we need it? Is it really necessary? A risk also that is not underlined enough, I think, is a risk to have some actors, especially private actors, to centralize too much data that are of importance for the citizens. We had the case with Cambridge Analytica 5 years ago back in the UK, and we still have the case here with Google wanting to buy Fitbit, which is a small application where all the health data of an individual are stored. And so there were a lot of complaints to the EU regarding that operation, because if Google is centralizing that much data on a person, what can they do about it? And how much control do they have on the population? So I think that's a major risk. And I think it also comes with opportunities. To be honest, I think it's a good momentum for the public actors to really reinforce their power, their positioning, their influence with everything that is related to basic services related to basic needs of the population, instead of translating that power to the private sector, even though you still have smart partnership. I think it's also a way to have breakthrough in the technology and to have this push where all the researchers, data engineers are very focusing and discovering new things by implementing projects that seems to be as usual, but the techniques is there. And I also think it's a way for us to, and I'm a bit optimistic saying that and maybe idealistic, it's a way for us to see that there is always a solution to problems, and that we can do better if we join efforts. And as Modo was saying, we can do much more than business as usual when it comes to trying to achieve the SDGs, when you're trying to achieve better public services, and when you're really trying to have an impact over the beneficiaries. So that's what is the geopolitics of AI today, Stephanie.
Thank you. Stu, do you want to add something?
Sure. Yep. So I think that there are many opportunities for different countries, different organizations to work together and collaborate on AI. As we can see, right, the strategies that different countries use in their pandemic response can be very different. And for example, in Singapore, we do aggressive testing, active case finding. And what does that mean? This means we actually have collected some data on asymptomatic cases. However, because we have very few patients who actually ended up in ICU, this means we may not have enough data to build a good AI model to predict the deterioration of patient condition. And I think that's where, because we have, in a way, if you look at the analogy of an elephant, right, we have a different view of the different parts of the elephant, right? We touch one part of the elephant and we say that, oh, this is the trunk, this is the leg, this is the tail, this is the ear. If we all come together collectively and share our learning, and not only that, to see whether there are ways to actually fuse the data together, we probably can do a lot more. So that's where I think the opportunities lie. But that's also where I think the risk is, because even before COVID-19, when we talk about AI, I think as part of the national strategy, quite a few countries are also talking about data sovereignty. We don't want data to leave the country. And this actually could potentially hamper cross-border AI collaboration. And not only that, I think from a data perspective, we also need to look at common data standards and common data models so that our data can interoperate. Because what I realize is that as we not just working with partners overseas, but even within across institutions, if you talk about healthcare, within the same country, there are a lot of different institutions that use different data standards, different data models. So if you want to integrate and fuse the data together, it takes tremendous amount of effort. I think we should collectively come together and see whether we can agree on some common data standards and common data models to adopt, so that then if there's a need for us to collaborate, the effort required to do so will be actually significantly less. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I would like to jump in here, if you allow me, just to reflect on what Sumoto was saying. I agree, Sumoto, and I think that's something that was not done previously with data, because we have different legislation with GDPR in the EU, with the US Act, and I think that's something that the AI and the pandemic is calling from us. What is the minimum benchmark that we need collectively if we want multilateralism, cross-collaboration among continents to work? And we're far from it, because also, as I was saying, as we can see, the political stance also from governments has an influence, and that's also where data is not neutral from a political point of view, an economic point of view, and social point of view. And the problem we have is aligning this on all those old minimum benchmark. I see it also as an opportunity for us to redesign the social contract. What kind, and I know it's big words, but it's quite simple when you go back to what Sumoto was saying in terms of minimum benchmark of collaboration. So what kind of society do we want? What are the minimum criteria that we want to be respected, whatever country you are in? And what are the compromises that we are ready to make to enhance collaboration and to have the better benefits to the beneficiaries? And to be a bit controversial, or at least to push the debate, I would say that sometimes it's also to say no. And we have to learn to say no. It's okay not to be that efficient. It's okay not to be that fast forward because we don't know yet how to collaborate, and we need to be stronger in that. So thank you, Simodo. I think you're right. It's yes, data sovereignty. It's going to be a big subject, and we really need to invest a bit more in working together on that. Thank you.
Thank you for this comment. I would like to go into your specific projects, and Virginie, we can start with you. Can you tell us more about your recent work about ethical AI post-COVID? In particular, you were talking about fairness and unbiased and so on. Can you just give us some insight about this?
Yes. So first, to go a bit back in March or April when the COVID was high, I worked on an AI project who was trying to map what was the impact of the public policies on the most vulnerable. Because a crisis always highlights the existing inequalities, and we have seen from the beginning that there were some targeted population at national but globally that were more affected, whether women, again, as I mentioned, but also people with less access and the low-income revenues population. So we work through an hackathon. That's why I mentioned that before. We were, I think, a group of 50 people, data engineers, public policies experts, atheists, as we call them now, where we try to design a correct problem statement, try to analyze and gather the data. So first, analyzing which countries are of relevance for our benchmark, to see the progression, to map, to identify. And what I have seen and what I think it was interesting is certainly having diverse team is a necessity, but it's not enough. I think also to be clear on the problem statement, what are we looking for? What is the impact we're trying to do? What I'm also very pushing at the moment, based on that experience and others, is what is the fit for purpose analysis from the public sector? We see a lot of initiatives and a lot of governments, even in small regions, trying to implement AI projects, but sometimes is it worth it? Meaning the investment is big at the beginning when you implement and you launch a technology, but then you also have to take into consideration the cost of capacity building, of updating the programs, in expanding the program. And something in some project I have seen and participated in, I'm not sure the return on investment is there. So I think there we can also maybe try to mainstream applications that have been developed on a bigger scale and have specific offers for those small regions and for small stakeholders that don't have the financial capacity to develop that. Something also that I'm working based on that experience is, I think we talk a lot about the ethical risk, but we don't take enough steps, meaning that the risks are there, but what do we do to address them? And how do we address them? I'm not so sure that the fragmentation of the AI landscape today is a good answer to that. There is a multiplication of hackathons, there is a multiplication of projects around AI, but to some extent I think there will need to be a centralized approach with safeguards, of course, but we need to be more coherent. And also, again, I think it's just now it's to walk the talk. I think, again, over the last 6 years, we didn't see new risks coming up. There are different cyber attacks, yes, but the generic term cyber attacks is there, and I think we are quite clear on identifying the risk. So now it's what do we do about it? From a political point of view, from a data engineer point of view, and how do we come together again to dream a bit more and to dream a bit bigger. It's not just about efficiency, it's about what kind of society do you want? What do you want to offer to people? And again, I was reading an article yesterday about someone was saying that having ethical benchmark and human rights benchmark are a bit against innovation, because when you are a researcher and a scientist, you make errors, and you have to make errors because that's how the biggest evolution of society has came to life. And I agree, but if you know that, for example, automated lethal weapons are presenting too high of a risk right now, should we implement it because just for the sake of sciences? And I think nowadays, I think it's where we're going to be we're going to need to be bold. And sometimes for scientists, it's going to be difficult for them to say, okay, that could be nice, but I think it's not the proper time to do it. And we're not going to do it because it's too expensive. It's not useful for society. And I'm going to give up on it. So that's what I'm focusing on by my writing, articles, and the project I'm working on, Stephanie.
Thank you. Stowell, you already gave us some insight about how do your government try to collect data, and but a specific question about research. Do you push some new research project, as we have, for example, in France, specifically on the COVID right now, to just analyze the data you've been collecting and probably try to anticipate another one that could come with another virus?
Yes, absolutely. So for the current response that we have to COVID-19, we are already sharing data with researchers. And for example, we work with our Sosui Hawk School of Public Health, where they actually help us build the compartmental model. So the different compartment being the population that is susceptible, exposed, infected, and recovered. So by having this compartmental model, we are able to simulate how the pandemic will pan out, depending on what kind of response we put in place. For example, if we were to close schools, for example, how will that change the trajectory of the pandemic? If we were to close workplaces, what happens? So we have a model based on the data that we have collected and that we actually work together with our School of Public Health to do. We have also set up what we call a modeling consortium, right? Because we wanted to do this in a more structured manner instead of going to the different, whether it's research institution or schools, on an ad hoc manner. We have set up a consortium, a modeling consortium comprising our colleagues from the academia to help us so that we can borrow their collective intellectual power and also data science capabilities. And an example of the work that we do with the university also is we work with our National University of Singapore, where they help us with network analytics. So because we have a lot of different cases happening, right? And what we want to do as part of what we call our backward contact tracing is to try to trace the source of the infection. And that is not a straightforward exercise because it requires a lot of information. It requires a lot of analysis and analysis of weak signals, right? Which means then that we have to then put the available information that we have in order to identify potential links across the different transmission clusters or the different cases. So that's where we have actually worked with our university. And this piece of work has also been further developed by working with our Defense Science Technology Agency. So they have also provided data science capabilities to help further this piece of work. And I think there's also a need for us to do longitudinal study on the long-term effect of COVID-19. We are only 6 months into this crisis, and the data that we have is still very limited. I think there's a need for us to continue to study the disease so that we can provide better care and better anticipate what could be the long-term effect from COVID-19. And what we're thinking really is to look at then how we can set up some sort of a disease registry for us to be able to carry on the analysis so that we know whether there are complications that arises much later, not immediately, maybe later to our COVID positive patients.
Fantastic. I think we are reaching the end of this panel. So I would like to thank you all. And I think we have a better view of what you've done and what your environment has done for this crisis, and hope we're not going to face another one, but at least we know that some people are trying to work on what happens and try to figure out if we can avoid a new one or at least anticipate it. Well, thank you very much, and see you next time. Have a good day.
Thank you. Thank you, Stephanie.